This is Brent.
And this is Amanda.
We are the Unreliable Narrators.
Here to talk about the strangeness, the mystery, and the wonder of Gene Wolfe's prose.
What is time?
What is memory?
What is a person?
Is this reality?
Where are we?
Do we exist?
Have you ever considered that all your choices were what brought you right here to this very moment?
Episode number 30. Hero as Werewolf number 2. So we open the new scene, and the new scene is presumably the gray-bearded man from before talking. There has been quite a few to come after her father said, since we come into town. Quite a few. So we get kind of a long back and forth about how he's a father, he's got a daughter, she's a hot commodity. Paul is interested in her. The father and daughter are living in a bus somewhere.
Yeah.
So it doesn't seem like they have great accommodations.
What do you mean? Hashtag van life.
It's not literally a bus down by the river, but here we are.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we get some description of these others that are interested, but it doesn't seem like we get any clarity about why he didn't surrender her to one of them, or why, spoilers, he ends up surrendering Janie to Paul, giving Janie to Paul. Is it because Janie seems interested in Paul? Because she does seem to be. Was in Paul's narration before, but when he first encounters them, he describes the woman rut on her, which means she's responding to his presence in some way that he's attuned to.
Yeah. And there's a spot in here where, so I'll go into it saying that this reminded me a bit of Le Guin's The Word for World is Forced.
Okay.
And it's part of the reason he rejected some of them. I had a fella here that wanted her 2 weeks back. He said he hadn't had no real woman in 2 years.
Yeah, this one's a little gross.
Well, I didn't like the way he said real. So the implication being that the guy had been with the masters.
Right. Perhaps after he had killed them.
Yeah. See, now I feel like we're just in Twilight territory.
I know, right?
It's like werewolves or vampires.
I don't know.
Yeah, but then part of it is like there seems to be another argument in here because the older man, the father, he remembers when things were a bit better for what they call humans. So in the Word for World is Forest. Yes, thank you.
It's not a great title. She had a different title for it, but her editor made her change it because it was too political. And of course, that's her anti-Vietnam novel, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but the Word for World is Forest just does not roll off the tongue.
It does not. So essentially these outside observers come in and they're like, well, you're saying that these creatures are not human, yet you're sleeping with them.
Yeah.
Your actions don't match up what you're saying.
Right.
And so there's a bit of...
Oh, and here I thought the line was necrophilia, but...
Well, it could go both ways. So.
Right.
But where it's like he doesn't like the way that he said real. And so there's a bit of this goes back to the beautiful woman who's now dead, where she's saying, hey, I've heard about your kind before, but also you're a throwback from before when everybody changed their genetics. And so, but then it's like the people that want to call themselves real humans, it's like, no, we're not related to you.
Yeah.
And it's like, but yet in some ways their actions don't match what they're...
Right.
Very convoluted. So then he changes it. It's like, how'd you find this dump here?
Yeah. He's like, I just looked around.
Yeah.
But, I mean, maybe Dad's doing a good job of vetting Paul, because he's like, necrophiliac? No. Okay, well, how'd you find us? Oh, okay, well, he navigated in ever-widening circles until he logically came upon what would be within range, where would they be staying.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's one thing I didn't call out from when they decided that him and the girl were going to take the fat man. Paul made a mental note like, well, wait, how far do they have to go?
Right. So he's paying attention to that.
Yeah. No, I like your read on it though, that he's like vetting out, like, so what is it? Okay, well,
Are you competent?
yeah. Are you a good hunter? What's your methodology?
Yeah. So then, little bit of anti-German racism, super fun there. Dad didn't want a foreigner in the family.
Yeah.
Cannibalism, just fine. No foreigners. Yeah. So Paul's looking at her. Got a pretty face, ain't she? He said, that's the dad. Paul nods. She's a mite thin, you was going to say. Well, that's true. I do my best to provide, but I'm feared and not shamed to admit to it. And then Paul comes out with a non sequitur. The ghost houses.
What's that?
That's what I've always called them. I don't get to talk to many other people. Where the doors shut on you, lock you in? Yes. Okay, so some kind of automation that detects an intruder and locks them in. And that's what Paul's afraid of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And also probably what the father's afraid of.
Yeah. Well, and then you get this, that ain't ghost.
Right. It's electricity, dude.
But then he says, now, don't you think I'm one of them fools that don't believe in them?
Right. Those aren't ghosts, but ghosts are real.
Mm-hmm. Which I did not see a ghost anywhere in the story.
No, I didn't either.
Okay.
But I also, I mean, this is where, sorry, this may be a bit too personal for the podcast, but like, you're a little bit like the father. Because, well, when somebody's like, blah, 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 I saw a ghost. And you're like, that's not a ghost. That's blah, blah, blah. Or, that's whatever it is. That, look, there's a perfectly logical explanation for that. Not that I don't believe in ghosts, because, but that's not a real ghost story. Like, you're very resistant to the ghost story that's just somebody wanting to be scared, but very open to the possibility. Well, yeah, they're real ghosts.
Now I feel like, you say that, and then I feel like the number of people that have not picked up on that over the years of my life.
Okay. Are you feeling uncomfortably seen right now?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Nah, that's fine.
All right. So, Paul, I don't want to read Paul being obsessed with Janie's breasts, but that's in there.
Well, yeah, it's two young people, and they're at the point where he's negotiating, like, hey, I want to start my own pack, essentially, is what it is. And the old man, he's navigating the complex set of questions. But they're both very distracted by each other.
Yes.
So we do get a little bit of background here, because we find out that the old man his surname's Pendleton.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, is that anything? Because, I mean, there's Pendleton, Oregon. Figured that probably wasn't it, because it was, after I looked it up, it used to actually be called Marshall, Oregon. It was renamed for George Pendleton, who's a U.S. Senator from Ohio. I was like, okay, well, that's probably not it. And then I was like, well, what about the Pendleton Wool Company? I'm like, well, no, that's just named for the town. And there was some etymology where it's like an overhanging settlement.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't really see that adds anything to the story.
Oh, I was just guessing that Gene Wolfe, like most people should, had some Pendleton wool blankets and looked over and there was a Pendleton tag sticking out. And so that's why he wrote it down. But maybe I'm importing too much of my own writing habits into this interpretation.
Yeah, so we get a little bit of background on his family, where he explains that they don't get genetically uplifted because they have too many genetic defects.
Yeah.
And this is where we get, so the girl in the hunting scene from the first section, she doesn't speak at all. And this is where we get this, like, yeah, she doesn't really speak.
Yeah, so Janie, our heroine, she's mute.
Mm-hmm.
So, and seems to lack language almost entirely.
Yeah.
Like, she doesn't seem to understand speech very much either, so.
No. And then there's a funny thing about diabetes. It's like,
yeah,
makes your blood sweet. And it's kind of like, yeah, I would have liked to try some of that. Like, not
right. Gross.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so their family are the Pendletons. Janie is Augusta Jane. So that's quite a name. Augusta Jane Pendleton. She sounds almost like a Austen heroine. And Paul is Paul Garou.
Yeah, I looked up that name. I couldn't really find anything on it.
Well, isn't French or werewolf loup-garou?
I think you're
I
right.
thought I just knew that. I didn't look. I should have looked it up because I just assumed that I knew that,
Yeah.
which is one of
Citation
those,
needed.
yeah, footnote, citation. See, Amanda. No, I think it's a reference to werewolf.
Actually, that makes more sense now that I think about it.
Yeah, so the Pendletons had bad blood and they've got genetic defects, but we are also getting a sense through his narration that we've got a class issue here, and they were poor farmers. They had these problems, but they're also not in the privileged class.
Yeah.
And so then they don't take, or they can't get the gene therapy, which just seems like they're the people that would benefit the most from, if we have gene therapy, they can fix things. Maybe we could fix diabetes. Sorry, that was a direct quote. I know how to pronounce it. But, and they're on a farm, but it doesn't seem to be doing anything. It's not working. And then they get run over or run off the land.
Well, it seems to me like there's some sort of either ecological renewal or there's some sort of construction project, but it was robots or something carrying
Right.
out commands because
the people are like literally chased off the land.
yeah, and one of them ends up getting injured.
Right.
So and the comment is we were forgotten.
Yeah. And then they don't have bullets for their old guns. They don't have their old weapons. They don't have their place. And then, so what are they going to do?
Yeah. And then their livestock, they get a disease and the livestock die. The crops fail.
Yeah. And so where Paul was born into this world after the genetic uplift, this guy had lived through it. And so we get a real sense of bleakness and lost opportunity.
Yeah. And, I think that's like there's the negotiation going on, but there's also like the education and.
Right.
Like, I don't want to say he's reminiscing, but he's kind of explaining their situation. And I think you keyed in there where Paul was born after this, so he doesn't have the memory of how it was before. And so, in some sense, it makes sense to me that's why the father chose him. Like, he's resourceful.
Yep.
And even though he's like, it goes back to that line, like, well, I call him Ghost House. I don't get to talk to a lot of people.
Right.
And so even though he's in a bad situation, like killing masters and even children and all sorts he is trying.
Right. And in some sense, he is a safe repository of the father's cultural memory because he seems to be able to attend to and comprehend it a bit.
Yeah.
But he is also very focused on getting Janie.
Yeah. So the funny thing is here, because it's like, he tells the old man, I want her. I'm not going away without her. He stood up without knowing why. But it's like the dad already had made the decision.
Yeah.
And it's like Janie thinks that her dad's going to knife Paul, but it's like, it's all very peaceful. Like,
yes,
her dad, Janie's dad, explains their family history and then lets Paul walk away with her.
Yeah, after telling him that if he wants to make her happy, he can let her cut up one of their victims while they're still moving around. So, yeah.
Yeah, so she's even more feral than he is.
Yeah.
Did you want to just cover anything else in there? It's a very...
No, I think that's most of what I wanted to cover there. I'm ready to, I don't know. The final act is, I think, my favorite. So
okay.
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, so we end section 2 with her dad saying, even a bad man can love his child. You remember that because it's true.
Yeah.
So that's the end of section 2 right there.
And just before that, he says, you can take her, but if you change your mind, don't just turn her out. I'll take her back, you hear. So even a bad man can love his child. And he's like, if it doesn't work out between you two, bring her home to me.
Yeah. So that's the end of section 2. To recap, Paul, after a successful hunt, has now gone and negotiated with the father of Janie, and now they have, yay, 2 young lovers starting their new werewolf pack.
I know. Right. So the third act opens with them on the hunt. And in this case, they've spotted a boy, brown-haired, slightly freckled, of 9 or 10, with an armload of books. So we've got a schoolboy
Yeah.
on his way to or from school.
It was a parenthetical in the first scene, and now it's just flat out like,
Yep.
Oh, we're going to chase a child.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what a pack would do, right? You either pull down the old and sick, or you pull down the young and helpless.
Yep. We are definitely in the perspective of a predator.
Yeah. So Janie and Paul are hunting in disguise. They're dressed in the clothing of the masters.
Yeah, I like the explanation. Like, he's got her in a veil.
Right, because even though they're not as fashionable as they used to be, it does hide her animality.
And it's got like little gems on it. So
Yep.
to further distraction, because this goes back to your comment, like, she doesn't really have, she understands, but she doesn't have any language or much language herself.
Yeah.
And so she lacks subtlety. She ends up betraying them just by her actions, by the look in her eye and on her face. So he needs to have something to help her not be picked out as easily.
Yes. Yeah, so the boy runs, and they run after him.
Yeah, and Janie's really the one that instigates this, because she's kind of just making a beeline for him.
Yeah, because she's hungry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Paul is trying to be more, where would I cut him off? Where's he going to go?
Right. And we saw that in Act 1, where Paul is very strategic in picking his victims, follows carefully. He's at the event, and he stays at the event the whole time, and then follows people as they disperse. And we saw a lot of strategic thinking there. But Janie just goes for it.
So he's following her, and it says Paul was just in time to see Janie follow him, the young boy, into a doorway in the center of a block. There's a new paragraph.
Yep.
So he found her clear-soled platform shoes in the vestibule. So Janie's
part of her disguise. She's kicked off her shoes.
Yeah, kicked off her shoes so she can run better. But it's under a 4-dimensional picture of
Hugo de Vries.
Yeah, and so de Vries was in the closing years of his life, and in the few seconds it took Paul to pick up the shoes and conceal them, so he still has presence of mind here that, like, oh yeah, you shouldn't be running around without shoes. Behind an aquarium, then we have phosphorescent
cephalopods.
Yeah. So now we've got glowing squids or cuttlefish. Had died, rotted to dust, and undergone rebirth as a fissioning cell in his mother's womb, with all the labyrinth of genetics still before him.
Yeah.
So it's a 4-dimensional picture. So what I'm imagining here, and I'm not even sure it's following.
Well, it's a holographic representation following him through his entire life, from conception to rotting away to dust.
Yeah, which is a lot.
I think so too.
Did you look up any information on Hugo?
No, I did not.
So he has some interesting aspects of his research that may or may not be relevant to the story. So he was a botanist, and he developed the mutation theory that was the process that natural selection worked by. And that seemed somewhat important.
Thematically speaking.
Yeah, thematically, because here we have the masters seem to be using the gene therapy to remove any mutations. So it's like, specifically, we've heard about harmful mutations.
Yeah.
But we haven't, like, a mutation's a mutation. So there are mutations that would confer potential benefits to a creature. And if your standard method of operation is to be like, oh, there's a mutation, we better correct that. yes, you're saving a lot of people from diabetes and any number of these other genetic defects that they've been discussing, but you're also losing any beneficial benefit.
Yeah, any potentially helpful mutations are also being edited out.
Yeah, so that was all packed in there in a little
in a weird like scene setting, getting me to imagine a future where it's not enough to have a snapshot on the wall or even a fancy painted portrait. Now you have to have a holographic representation of the entirety of a human's life.
With glowing squid and a tank.
Yes.
And he's running with Janie's high heel shoes and he's hiding them behind there. So it's like there's this hologram squid and he's stashing the high heel shoes.
Yeah. And so then empty corridor, a disheveled library book lying on the floor, and then there's a lift shaft. There are elevators, a lift shaft and a down shaft, all clustered in an alcove. The boy would not have waited for an elevator with Janie close behind him. And then we get a description of Paul's ride in the lift shaft, which sounds fantastic. We have thickened air that is as viscous as corn syrup, but it's extra oxygenated, and you're floated up.
Yeah, not only that, but it stimulated his whole being.
Yeah, so Hunter on the hunt here.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so Janie's above him, and he's following up, and she's chasing the boy. He's chasing Janie. Here we go.
Yeah, but he, instead of just following Janie, he's like, oh, the boy's going to come back through. And then this, so this is a brutal and hard story to talk about because on one hand,
that?
Well, it's like on one hand, you're reading it and you're like, oh yeah, this guy's not a good guy.
Now, on the other hand, you're invested in his success.
Exactly.
I'm sorry. Maybe I just am lacking empathy for the little boy here, which is really odd because I would think that, all my maternal instincts would be awake or something. But I'm in the perspective of the hunter. And he's like, oh, the boy's going to come back down. So Paul intercepts him.
Yeah.
Grabs him.
Plucks him out of the air, the thickened air.
Yep.
The boy's pointed, narrow face, white with fear under a tan, turned up toward him. Don't, the boy said. Please, sir, good master. So the boy either mistakens him as a master or...
Although he's clearly afraid and knows that he's being hunted.
Yeah, and so when he's called good master, but Paul clamped him under his left arm and with a quick wrench of his right, broke his neck.
Yep, that's it.
So...
Yeah, so the boy's dead. And Janie is swimming head down with the downshaft current, her mouth open and full of eagerness. So she's clearly hungry. Her black hair like a cloud about her head. She had lost her veil. Paul showed her the boy and stepped into the shaft with her. The hatch slammed behind him and the motion of the air ceased.
Yeah, so now they're stuck in there.
Yeah, because they're not hunting between buildings here. They are inside of a building that has security measures. I mean, we've got floating columns of air, one up, one down, and we also have some kind of security system.
Yeah, so we've heard about ghost houses.
Yes.
And in section 1 and in section 2, Paul has expressed his fear of these ghost houses.
Right.
So here we are. He's a werewolf in a haunted house.
Yeah, so he's like, okay, something's wrong. The hatch has closed. They're stuck here in the shaft. The current is reversing, lifting them. He tries to swim against it, but he can't. The dead boy begins to talk, but Janie puts her hand over his mouth to muffle it, and then the wall starts talking. I'm sorry to detain you, but there is reason to think you have undergone a recent deviation from the optional development pattern. I believe that's a typo for optimal. The optimal development pattern. In a few minutes, I will arrive in person to provide counseling. While you are waiting, it may be useful for us to review what is meant by optimal development. And there it's spelled correctly. Look at the projection. In infancy, the child first feels affection for its mother, the provider of warmth and food. And then there's an ellipses. And Paul's looking at the door at the other end of the room. He swings a heavy chair against it. And the voice keeps droning on. Later, one's peer group becomes for a time all important, or nearly so. The boys and girls you see are attending a model school in Armstrong. Keyword.
Yeah.
Notice that no tent is used to mask the black of space above their air tent. So we're getting some kind of canned instruction propaganda that is just bouncing off of Paul, who is busy swinging chairs at doors and trying to figure out how to get out of this locked room.
Yeah, and once again, we get at Armstrong.
Yeah.
So apparently we have schools. I assume this is a town on the moon.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So model school in Armstrong, no tent is used to mask the black of space above their air tent. So yeah, that's where we are. Or that's where the narrative is. So the lock bursts from the door frame. Paul slammed his shoulder against it, and before it could close again, he put his knee where the shattered bolt socket had been. A chrome-plated steel rod as thick as a finger had dropped from the chair when his blows had smashed the wood and plastic holding it. After a moment of incomprehension, Janie dropped the dead boy, wedged the rod between the door and the jamb, and slipped through. He was following her when the rod lifted and the door swung shut on his foot.
He screamed and screamed again, and then, in the echoing silence that followed, heard the loudspeaker mumbling about education and Janie's sobbing, indrawn breath.
Yeah.
This is, like, I hate anything about, like...
Oh, what? Foot injuries?
Yes, foot injuries.
Ankle injuries?
Uh-huh. Through the crack between the door and the frame, the 2-centimeter space held in existence by what remained of his right foot, he could see the livid face and blind, malevolent eyes of the dead boy, whose will still held the steel rod suspended in air.
Yeah, so apparently the boy telekinetically moved the rod.
Yeah, so he was trying to talk, and Janie put her hand over his mouth to silence him. So we have a situation where he's dead.
Yes, like the woman was in scene 1.
Yeah, like the woman was. And then the woman was trying to use the blanket, but the boy, he uses his powers to pull the rod that was holding the door open.
Yeah. Die, Paul shouted at him. Die, you're dead. The rod came crashing down. Then we get the loudspeaker again. This young woman, the loudspeaker said, has chosen the profession of medicine. She will be a physician. And she says now that she was born for that. She will spend the remainder of her life in relieving the agonies of disease. This is a little overwritten, but that's okay. Several minutes passed before Paul could make Janie understand what it was she had to do. Back to the loudspeaker, this is in italics. After her 5 years training in basic medical techniques, she will specialize in surgery for another 3 years before... It took Janie a long time to bite through his Achilles tendon. When it was over, she began to tear at the ligaments that held the bones of the tarsus to the leg. Over the pain, he could feel the hot tears washing the blood from his foot. Okay, first of all, I would like our listeners to know that the big problem here is that Brent is so traumatized by the mention of the tearing of the Achilles tendon that he may not be able to parse the literary brilliance of this closing scene. But do we need to invoke injuries to Achilles tendon? Do you need exposure therapy? Do you need to hear about the time I was carrying my child and walking into, this is back, I owned a bookstore and a coffee shop, and there was a heavy door, heavy metal and glass door. And I was walking in, arms full of babies, because I had 2 at the time. And I kicked the door open and stepped in, but it was so heavy, it kind of fell toward me and it caught my Achilles tendon on my back foot as I stepped forward. And I don't know if I've had a broken foot, I've given birth, but that visceral, awful, horrible, my feet hurt right now thinking about it. My tendons hurt right now. I can feel the cut, the pain of it. The scrape. It's awful. So anyway.
You're not
body
helping.
Horror, I guess. I don't know. Brent's kind of writhing in his chair right now. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
Fine.
No, I've been bruised in the heel before with farming accidents and with livestock and whatnot before. So it's not fun.
No. And also, okay, so now that we're past the body horror description, let's talk about the technical brilliance of this. I think that the loudspeaker talking about a young woman being a physician is maybe slightly overwritten, but it's also so good here. Okay, you said bruised heel. I feel like that might be a reference to something other than just a literal injury. So would a bruised heel have any cultural or social significance for anyone? Did you look that up?
Well, yeah. The Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and above all beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and the dust you shall eat all the days of your life. I'll put a enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel.
Yeah, so theologically, this is the curse that God issued to the serpent for tempting Adam and Eve to eat of the forbidden fruit. So we've got a serpent here. We have eating going on, although I don't know if a 9-year-old boy qualifies as an apple. But yeah, and then the bruising of the heel, crushing of the head is interpreted in Christian theology as Christ's sacrifice on the cross being the bruising of his heel, and the defeat of the devil that represents being the crushing of the serpent's head. I mean, to give you the thumbnail sketch of something that's hugely thematically important.
Yeah, maybe I'm veering off here too, but
I don't know. I have several other layers I would like to unpack.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Well, I mean, we have the tears washing the bloodstained foot. That is a clear invocation of Mary Magdalene washing Jesus's feet with perfume and her tears and wiping his feet with her hair. A hugely, I keep saying hugely, I need better vocabulary, but this is one of the most significant episodes in the New Testament, which is full of significant episodes. This is preparing Jesus's body for burial before his death. And it is the Mary Magdalene, the symbolically unclean woman who has been made clean, who has been brought into the kingdom, and offering the service, like washing of feet being a culturally significant event in Middle Eastern culture. I don't know, like Jesus washes the feet of his disciples at the Last Supper. This stuff matters.
Yeah, and Luke chapter 7 here.
Yes.
And behold, a woman of the city who was a sinner, when she learned that he was reclining at table in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of ointment. And standing behind him at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears, and wiping them with the hair of her head, and kissed his feet and anointed them with the ointment. So, and then, of course, the Pharisees are like, well, if he
should have sold that perfume and given the money to the poor.
Yeah. You should have known she was a sinner.
Yeah.
There is another heel catcher.
Yeah.
Is another one I think is layered in there, because when Isaac and Rebecca, when they have children, she has twins.
Yep.
And she's like, oh, why do I feel so horrible? And it's like, oh, yeah.
Because there are two babies in there.
Yeah, because there's two babies in there. But not
every woman I've known that had twins had a really hard time with pregnancy.
Yeah. And it says, so it's 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 people from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. So
humanity is older. Humanity is Esau. The humans, aka the cannibal werewolves.
Yeah, so you get Jacob as heel catcher.
Yeah. And the boy telekinetically removes the rod and catches Esau/Paul by the heel.
So I think that one's probably layered in there.
I think that makes a lot of sense, yeah.
And then with the ruddy cheeks in the beginning, where it's like, oh, no, I'm human. I am of Adam.
Yeah. Yeah, and here we have, so I don't know if you're ready to talk about the serpent yet, but this also then loops us back to the pretty woman in Act 1 who is killed, and she was dressed in a skirt made out of vines and some kind of corset or brassiere made out of a serpent.
Yeah, snakes are a complicated image in the Bible.
Yes.
Most people just think snake and it's like, oh, snake bad. But
right.
It's much more than that, because like snakes are actually portrayed in a positive light too, because it's like they shed their skin and that gets attached to wisdom. So it's a renewing. Right. And so the one snake that everybody's thinking of, yeah,
that one's a bad one.
Yeah. So it's the beast of the field, which in theory should have been submitted to Adam, because it's like he had dominion over the snake, but then the snake was crafty and wise and deceived humanity, when instead of deceiving, the snake should have been using his skills for good guidance.
Yeah, well, I think that just literarily, that's a well-drawn scene. The narrative of the physician. Of course, Jesus is the good physician.
Yeah.
So here we have Janie surgically saving Paul by biting through his foot. She's crying. There's clearly a kindness here in an incredibly brutal scene.
Yeah. Well, and then you have looking forward to, so what does this mean for Paul? He's going to be limping around.
Right. He's going to have to, I don't know, carry a stick or a cane or a crutch of some kind. And yeah.
Yeah. So then you have
maybe one of those platform shoes will help him out.
Oh, maybe. But you have the bruising of the heel, but then it's the limping.
Yeah.
Because you have when Jacob wrestles with the angel.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, back to Jacob again, heel catcher, but then when he wrestles the angel, he gets wounded.
Yeah.
In the hip in that case, but his leg is wounded and he limps.
Yeah, and he, for the rest of his days,
yes,
he limped around.
Yeah. I don't think there's a Fisher King reference here, but I kind of want to make one, but that may be a reference too far. But yeah, there's so much layered in here in this ending, and it's a surprisingly tender scene, I think.
Yeah, she's crying. She doesn't know how to help.
Yes. He can make her understand, though.
Yeah. And so she's trying to get him out of this.
Yeah. And then she does what's really difficult.
Yeah. You're right. It is a surprisingly tender scene, despite all the talks of Achilles tendons being...
Yes. And the fact that they just killed a little boy, and this is what they do, and they're werewolves. Or at least wolfish humans. Brutal and cruel.
Yeah.
So do we want to talk about the afterword? The commentary from Wolfe?
Yeah. And this is from the best of...
Yeah, so one thing I really like about the best of Gene Wolfe is we actually get some of Wolfe's commentary on his stories. Ever since this story appeared, I've been getting heat for my spelling of werewolf. So he reverted to the original spelling to point up the meaning of the word man-wolf. We would be more apt to say wolfman, though the ideas conveyed are distinctly different. Our werewolf is a man who becomes a wolf. The man-wolf envisioned by the Anglos and the Saxons was a man to be feared as wolves were feared, and for the same reasons. And then another Kipling quote, wolf-wise, feigning and flying, and wolf-wise, snatching his man. Where was the original Anglo-Saxon word for the male of the human species? Man designated a human being. We see the ghostly traces of this when we say, for example, that Molly Pitcher manned a gun at Monmouth. I wanted the old original import, and so titled the story you have just read as I did. So we get his justification here.
Yeah, and that Kipling quote is from a poem, The King's Task.
Yeah, so I read an interview in which Wolfe was asked about the story and what he was trying to communicate in it. Was that something that you found?
Yes, but I don't remember which one it was.
See, and here I'm trying to look through my notes and find it. So I don't have the reference to the particular interview, but he said that he had a very particular theme in mind when writing this story, and that was he wanted to explore love.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think about a hero as werewolf is, he's playing with man-wolf, wolf-man, a man to be feared as a wolf. That makes a lot of sense. But if love's the theme, what's love?
Well, so I'll take what her Janie's father says. If even a bad man can love his child.
Yes.
So these are werewolves. So there's a pack mentality in like putting the others in your pack in there. And then I think you get the distinction between humans, masters, and the others, police dogs. Part of it is that I think Wolf is saying that to, like, sometimes when you love someone, like in Janie and Paul's case, Janie's having to cripple Paul for the rest of his life to get him out of that situation. And I think where we get the hunting scene where it's like, oh, you cry like an infant. And it's like, I jingled a bell. It's like empathy, curiosity, concern for others being hurt because Janie is, I assume it's Janie, was the one that was moaning and pretending to be hurt. So the empathy and curiosity and things like that we tend to think of as human, the humans and masters share that in the story. And our love interest stand-in is a mute girl who has severely impoverished in this future history to the point that they've been forgotten about because their genetic line is considered inferior.
Right.
There's like not a lot in the way of communication, like verbal communication between them. So it seems to be the act and the willingness to act.
Right.
Is what love is. I think I'm kind of shooting from the hip here.
No, I think that's fair. I mean, it's a big question and I didn't warn you. But we're in Paul's perspective most of the time. And so Paul's love for her, I think at first we're queued up to think of it as very base. You know, he's distracted by the swelling of her breasts under her filthy shirt. I believe that's a line.
Yes.
He's smelling her and he's attracted to her scent. We're getting an animalistic kind of thing here. But the courtship scene, which is, you know, I think an ungenerous reading would be, oh, two men negotiating for the fate of the woman. But he then stays deeply invested in her well-being. You know, they're out hunting. He's tried to figure out a way that she can hunt with him without compromising either of their safety. When she does, he wastes not one moment of the narrative regretting or irritated with, or he's tracking with her. He's predicting what she'll do. So he's come to understand her and he wants to understand her and he wants to solve the situation. And then when he needs her to do something, she then responds by doing it and seems to be deeply emotionally affected by how difficult it must be for him. She's crying as she's hurting him. Yeah. So they've developed some mutuality across a great gulf.
Yeah. I was going to say as you were talking, I was thinking about this where it's like, oh, there's the read where it's like, oh, two men talking about
right,
handing the woman off. Then at the end we get, oh yeah, she can't talk. She can understand. And then when we go back and the dad is interpreting her nonverbal, her communication in the context of the story. So when you go back and read, she is an active participant in that. So
it has to be filtered because she doesn't have the ability to talk, but her needs are being continually considered, communicated, and cared for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just seems, what is love? What is love in a post-apocalyptic wasteland where humanity's reduced to eating the flesh of uplifted humans?
Yeah. What can love be in that context? But okay, willingness to bite through your Achilles tendon if needed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I just get the imagery of this just causes me to be squeamish.
Uncomfortable. That's okay.
I'm actually very good in an emergency. It's just when it's
narrator voice. He is very good in an emergency.
So it's just the thinking about it that's
Yeah. That's fair.
Did you have any other things that you wanted to say?
Well, I just, this is very Wolfe in some of the things that I love the most about Wolfe. And so him saying, when I read that interview, and he said that he was exploring love, of course, Gene Wolfe would explore love in the context of otherworldly trauma and violence, and pairing some kind of truly fascinating futuristic sci-fi with the resurrection of the old Anglo-Saxon fears of the man wolf, and explore affection in this incredibly, I don't know, it's very Wolfe. Like, what's love? Love is the willingness to bite through your foot. Or love is the willingness to hamper yourself with a less effective hunter because she can't mask her animality as well. Like, love is the willingness to go along with that or to accommodate that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because you get, I was going to say lesser writers, less skilled writers who are trying to do different things.
Yeah, let's go with that.
Where it's like you get like a romance novel, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh, what is love? And it's like so formulaic.
Right.
Yeah, I'm thinking of like all those Harlequin romance novels that like,
all of the Harlequin romance novels that you've read.
yes, that show up at the library book sales
yeah.
and like used bookstores and that type of stuff.
And you've got your tropey plots of there's a misunderstanding that they have to overcome or something.
Yeah, but even then, like, would any of the answers to the questions of what is love in that formula, if we were to take that 1,000 years ago to Aboriginal Australia, was there any touch point, or would they even understand it? Or if we were to take it to Iceland when they were first colonizing it, or, even go back even a little bit further where it's like when we're walking out of Africa, would they even understand any of the tropes or the interactions? Because sometimes I think people just fall back on formulas and not like, oh, well, this is the next step in the play, even though.
Right. Or maybe at most they'll look at the gratification of sensuous desires, whether it's like literally the physical consummation of a romantic relationship, or it's, oh, he provides me with these luxuries that I want, or, oh, she offers me, a cozy home, or anything tropey like that, where you're like, okay, but you're talking about very, in a sense, frivolous desires, not fundamental needs. And so when you strip life back to the essentials, can you care enough about a person or care enough about life itself, right? That, close to the bone, right? Where we all have been or will be at some point in our lives up against the line. And whether it's a cancer diagnosis or loss of a loved one or job loss or whatever, we'll all be up against it at some point, and love that can act when it needs to act and not just sentimentalize when it's feeling warm and fuzzy. That's a different thing.
Yeah, it is.
And here we have monstrous people who are quote unquote human, but oh my goodness. Yeah, it's a little rough.
Yeah, it'd be just like Wolfe to, okay, what does love mean? And then let's push this context so far that we can barely understand it. And not even barely, but like it just seems like such a weird context.
Well, I think most readers would find it off-putting as a love story. So, like, not most Wolfe readers, we're strange people. But then I think about, okay, so Wolfe himself, I think it's pretty well known that at the end of her life, Rosemary, Wolfe's wife, dealt with pretty significant decline. She had physical issues and also cognitive decline at the end of her life. And Wolfe dedicated years of his life to caring for her. And as I understand it, the majority of those years that she was suffering from cognitive decline, he was her primary, if not sole, caregiver. And that's a very at the bone kind of thing. The person who was your companion, the person that you had a mutual and, we help each other, we inspire each other, we communicate with each other. And then one person loses that entirely. And the other one also toward the end of their life. So declining abilities, and his whole day would have been at least on some level, about making sure that she was taken care of, even though she probably, toward the end of her life, didn't understand that that's what was happening.
Yeah.
And so someone caring for someone else, this is such an ordinary thing in one sense because it happens constantly, and it's such a heroic thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, that seems similar to me to biting through the Achilles tendon, but maybe that's just my imagination.
No, I think you're right. Yeah, he wrote this, and then decades later,
Yeah.
kind of lived it.
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't bite through Rosemary's Achilles tendon, but he cared for her, is what I mean.
Yeah,
to clarify.
yeah. To clarify what we mean. Symbolically, though, a lot of that has to be just that hard. Anyway, you usually ask me this, but any closing thoughts, sir?
No, despite being squeamish about the story,
Yes.
I actually like it. And one of the things that I don't know if it's the story that clued me in that Wolfe was a writer I should be handling more carefully, but it just struck me where it's, oh, no, this is clearly a reference to Christ and the woman weeping on his feet, and
Yeah.
yet it is in such a weird context. It's like I need to step back and think about this because I have a habit sometimes of, if I'm reading short stories, it's like I breeze through a dozen short stories in a day, and sometimes if there's not much substance there, I won't remember them later. But a lot of times with Wolfe, it's like, yeah, okay, that was a punch to the gut, and I need to think about that.
Yeah. I don't know if it was reading this story in particular versus many of his other stories, but I'm often just reading in a very kind of consuming way. I get through a lot of books at a time typically, and I don't think every book requires the same level of attention, or even if a book could benefit from that kind of attention, I may not always have it to give, but it all goes in on some level and it's good for me. But I feel like Wolfe and others like him, but a lot of it's Wolfe, ruined me for a lot of that lighter reading. When I read an author and they over-explain, or they use a pattern or symbolism or make a reference and it's thin, it doesn't quite hold up. It's writers like Wolfe that really ruined that kind of thing for me. I'm happy to be ruined. Something that's a little less substantial or just a little more obvious. I'm not interested. I might be entertained for a while, but it's forgettable. It can often be very frustrating because you're like, that is an excellent concept. Could you just lighten up your touch a little bit? And here's Wolfe, and there's a phrase, there's a sentence, there's a brief description of scenery, and the possibilities unfold. The Unreliable Narrators are Amanda Patchen and Brent Towell. And, as Gene Wolfe said, magic is diplomacy. It isn't just saying the words, it's who says them, how he says them, and when he says them.